Hi, my name is Allison Gray, and I'm the director of the Goleta and Santa Ynez Valley Libraries. Welcome today for this wonderful program. We were very fortunate this year to receive a Book to Action grant from the California Center of the Book, which is funded from the Federal Institute for Museum and Library Services. Our book we chose this year was a graphic novel by George Takei called They Called Us Enemy. We have given out over 100 copies to people in our communities, and we've had many copies available for people to check out. We've had book discussions and all kinds of programs based on the book. Today, we're most fortunate to have the book's artist with us. Harmony Becker is going to tell us about her experience illustrating this book, as well as her new book. But before she gets started, I wanted to let you know that if you want to be able to ask her questions, as we will have time for a Q&A at the end of her presentation, please log into your Facebook or Google account, and you will be able to ask questions there. If not, you can send questions to solvinglibrary@cityofgoleta.org through email, and you can ask them through that. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Harmony Becker to Goleta, Buellton, and Solving. Welcome, Harmony.
Hi, thank you so much
Hi.
for having me. I'm so excited to be with you guys today.
We're thrilled for you to be here with us.
Let me set up my presentation real quick and we can get started.
Okay, great.
Okay. You can't see it yet, can you? Okay, there it is.
Now we can.
All right. Okay, so again, thank you so much for having me here today. I feel super honored to be asked to come and speak with you. As you introduced me, my name is Harmony Becker, and I was the illustrator for George Takei's graphic memoir, They Called Us Enemy, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my process today. So I was first approached for this project in November of 2017, where I met our editor, Lee Walton, at Comic Arts Brooklyn. He saw my comic, Himawari House, which at the time I was self-publishing as a webcomic under a different title. Today is actually, I think, the anniversary of the first day that I ever started publishing that comic online. So it's been like 4 or 5 years since that happened. So. Anyway, I was selling print copies, just like self-published at festivals and conventions and places like that. And Lee approached me and asked if I would be interested in a project about the Japanese American experience. Of course, as a Japanese American who experiences things, I said yes, before knowing anything else about who or what the project was about. Lee then followed up a couple of months later in February of 2018, and he told me then that it was going to be a project for George Takei about the Japanese American incarceration during World War II. Well, as you all already know, I agreed to the project, and so here we are. Our writers, Stephen Scott and Justin Eisinger, did a great job of adapting George's story into a comic script. They had seen the success that had come about with March, which was also edited by Lee Walton, about the civil rights movement and how that had great success as a graphic novel and reaching a new audience. And so they had the idea to approach George about his story. And they had already been working with him for, I want to say, about a year before I got involved with the project. They worked directly with him, and they used elements of his memoir, which is called To the Stars, as well as various talks he's given, like his TED Talk in Kyoto, which shows up in the book. By the time I received the script in October of 2018, it looked something like this. So you can see it says, Page 9, Panel 1, Interior Takei Household, Los Angeles. A pregnant mama tends to 2 young boys. George is 3, Henry is 2. He is a very chunky baby. For some reason, this point was very important to George. The boys are playing on the floor. Mama says, George, you be nice to Henry. George says, yes, Mama. Caption of George. When he was born, my brother was as large as great big fat Henry VIII, which is who he was named for. So as you can see, it reads a little bit like a movie script or a screenplay, and it details in each panel the setting, where the characters are, what they're doing, and what they're saying. So I would work from this script, and first I would lay out the number of panels. So this is a page where the panels laid out. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room to play around when you have a set number of panels per page, but I would still try to set up the page so that I could emphasize certain things. For example, I would use larger panels for more impact. You can see in this scene that I wanted to emphasize that last panel. I could have made that third panel larger to focus on the character of Daddy and how he made the effort to get to know the people of Block 6. Or I could have made that next panel, the panel of Mrs. Takahashi, larger to focus on her. But I really wanted the emotional impact that came from making that last panel really large and really dark. You can also use generally wider panels for setup shots, like that top one there. Having a wider panel tends to help establish a sense of space. And sometimes you can also change the shape of panels to look a bit more dynamic. For example, during action scenes, diagonal lines tend to give a sort of a dynamic feel as opposed to straight lines, which feel more static and kind of grounded. So then after setting up the panels, I would add the text, making sure that it flowed smoothly from panel to panel. Generally, you'll have characters who speak first on the left-hand side so that the bubbles don't get crossed and you get confused about who's speaking, that sort of thing. Putting the text in before the artwork also ensures that there's no crucial elements getting covered up by speech bubbles and that everything fits well into the panel. So from there, I would do thumbnails, which are like rough sketches. If I were just setting up these shots, I could probably afford to work much rougher than this, like not even put in faces or like the table or anything. But as these were going to be seen by George and the rest of the team, I wanted to make sure that I also included enough information for it to read clearly. So include facial expressions and body language and things like that. I would send the thumbnails to the team in batches of about 50 pages each for them to review before I would move on to inks. So here's that same page, inked. I usually don't do a pencil stage, although I work completely in digital, so I guess a better word might be tighter sketch. They called us, and we had a pretty tight deadline. I did thumbs, inking, and toning for 200 pages in about 7 months. You can see the lines of that thumbnail sketch underneath the panels there. I do all my comic work from thumbnails to final toning in Clip Studio, which is really great for making comics. For shading, I use a method that digitally emulates the look of screen tones, which are common in manga. Clip Studio is also really great for this because they have a lot of screen tones included in the software and a library with screen tones and materials made by other users you can download. I'm not sponsored by them, I just really like the program. So if you're like into comics or something, I'd recommend using this program. So I wanted to show very quickly how this process differs slightly when I'm also writing the story myself. This is a page from my next graphic novel, which is called Himawari House. So it starts chapter 9, Tadaima. Page 1, panel 1, close up on a stew bubbling on the stove. Panel 2, Hejong is chopping negi. Panel 3, Hejong drops the negi into the stew. Panel 4, Hejong tastes the stew. Panel 5, Hejong's eyes light up like a shoujo manga characters. Caption, delicious. So yeah, this webcomic, which I had mentioned that I was self-publishing when I got approached for They Called Us Enemy, got picked up by the publishing company for Second, and it's coming out this fall, which I'm very excited about. It's a story about 3 girls from different countries who are living together in a house in Tokyo, and it deals a lot with the language barrier. One key feature of the book is that it's actually written in multiple languages. Anyway, because there's less people in the pipeline, it's mostly just me and my editor going back and forth. The script is a lot simpler because I'm the one who's writing and drawing it. I generally wouldn't write out word for word how I wanted each panel to look because I had them pretty clear in my head already and I didn't need someone else to interpret my thoughts. Here's that finished page. A lot of the details that I didn't write in the script show up here, such as those sound effects and body language and facial expressions. You can see that I tend to put a little bit less information on each page too, just to let each moment breathe a little bit more. Here's another page from Himawari House. You can see kind of in general compared to They Called Us Enemy, I tend to put less panels on each page so that I can make each one bigger, and there's also a little bit less text. This is a little bit, you can see the experimental approach that I have with conveying different languages. I had the idea to only show subtitles when what is being said in a different language is actually being understood. So the readers then put into the shoes of the characters in that sense that you're there along with them. You're not really an omniscient character, but you only have as much knowledge as the character has themselves. Anyway, this is just to show you a sort of a different approach to comic scripts and layouts. Coming back to They Called Us Enemy, here's another thumbnail from the book. You can really see where my interest lies on this page. Some scenes I can just denote a couple of scribbly lines for the buildings and people, such as that last panel there. But I really care about conveying emotions in a way that connects with the audience. So any scene with a really strong emotion, I would generally draw the faces quite detailed even from the thumbnail stage. My personal standard is that I have to make myself cry if I'm drawing a really emotional scene. I have a pet peeve of reading a scene that's supposed to be emotional in a comic, but the emotion doesn't get through to you because it doesn't read on the character's face. And while that is usually a stylistic choice, and there's a lot of like styles that are really kind of graphic and exaggerated that I really love, but I suppose like my background of studying sort of Disney style animation doesn't really let me get away with that kind of thing. They'd always say to get into the characters, feel what they feel, understand what they're coming from, and then use the lines on the page to try to convince the audience that what they're seeing in front of them is a real person that they can connect with and relate to. So I suppose I've really taken that to heart. So I didn't actually get any feedback from George or even speak to him directly until most of the thumbnails were already finished. So a lot of the research that I did for the book was conducted on my own. Before I even had the full script, I went to the Santa Anita racetrack, which shows up in the book as one of the temporary camps that Japanese Americans were held at before they got put onto the trains for the more permanent camps. This was a kind of a strange experience because I showed up there kind of expecting that there would be some, I don't know, maybe a plaque. I don't know if I just didn't see it, but I remember going there and just feeling like I'm just at a racetrack. Like there was no indication that anything of the history that had occurred in this place. So that was a little bit jarring. I was lucky enough to be visiting my brother and sister-in-law in the Bay Area when there was an exhibit up in Hayward with a lot of artifacts from the camps, including this letter. The person who wrote it, a Kawata-san, describes attempts to start a poultry farm and raise hogs to be as self-sustaining as possible within the camp. They also describe a little bit about the monotony of the day and their experiences. I feel really grateful to the people who came before me and did so much to preserve this time in history, to not let it be forgotten. I also went to the Japanese American National Museum, which was actually funded in part by George, with the redress payment from the US government that they sent almost 50 years after his imprisonment. I found a really incredible DVD there of footage in some of the camps made on contraband cameras that people had to sneak in. It made me really emotional. There's something about seeing the people there actually living their lives inside the screen, taken on cameras that were in their own hands, not taken by outsiders commissioned to show America how, oh, it's not actually that bad. These people want to be here. They're so cooperative. They're loyal American citizens because they chose to do this and they're having a great time. I started watching this sort of documentary of found footage, looking for footage just of the barracks, and I ended up in tears. The documentary is called Something Strong Within. I'm not completely sure if it's available for purchase online, but it is at the Japanese American National Museum. If you ever find yourself there, I definitely recommend checking it out. Most of my research, though, I did with the help of good old Google. This is a drawing of me asking Google to show me what a canteen from the 1940s looked like. This was my first graphic novel, and it wasn't until I actually started work that I realized how much research I was going to need to do. Literally every object has to be drawn, so I took a lot of care to find as much reference as I possibly could. Everything from the model of trains used, to the shoes, to the clothes and the hairstyles, the type of food eaten, the trays that were used to eat the food, furniture, excuse me, random objects that might have shown up in the background. It was really important for me to get those kinds of details right. I do definitely have to admit I might have fallen short a little bit when it came to portraying the U.S. soldiers' uniforms. There's so much variety; it was hard to tell what would be worn when accurately. I did realize once showing the thumbs and inks to George that Google is often wrong, as there had been a couple of locations that George remembered differently. For example, the mess hall in Tule Lake. Here's a sketch that George did to show me the layout of his family's barracks in Tule Lake, along with some notes about the setup. You can see he had a little sketch there where his bed, Henry and Nancy's bed were all pushed together, and Mom and Daddy's beds were pushed together on the other side. You remember that there was a potbelly stove there. You remember the piece of linoleum that was there, blue with white stars on the floor, the cot bed that they converted into a couch. I was often really amazed at how much he remembered and how clearly, having only been like 8 years old. I took this photo at San Diego Comic-Con when the book was released. That's our editor, Lee, on the left there, and George is signing the book for my brother here. One thing that happens a lot at signings, many people come up to George and tell him that they had family in the camps as well. And then when George asks them in which camp, they often don't actually know the answer. This is something that we talk about a little bit in the book, the sense of shame that led so many Japanese Americans to withhold their own history from their descendants. We owe so much to George's father for being willing to discuss his family's incarceration with George, as well as to George himself for sharing his family's story that we can pass it on to others, hopefully filling in a little bit of the gaps and ensuring that this time in history is not forgotten or repeated. Anyway, thank you so much for coming today and listening to my presentation. I am so grateful to have been a part of the team that brought this story to a new medium and a new generation, and I'm so grateful to you for coming and listening today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harmony. That was really fascinating. Once again, to those that are listening, if you don't have a Google or Facebook account that you can use to send in your questions, you can email questions to solvinglibrary@cityofgoleta.org. But I have some questions, and they're questions that I gathered during our book discussions that we held at the virtually at the library on this book, and then also some questions that I have as a graphic novel fan. And I just wanted to ask you, did you always enjoy drawing?
Yeah, I did. It kind of runs in my family. My dad is a painter. My mom has always liked drawing. My brother is actually a professional animator. And my sister and I, we used to, when we were kids, we would draw comics for each other and like kind of put like author's notes and like Q&As in the margins. But we were like each other's only reader. But yeah, I've always been into comics. I've always been into drawing.
So have you explored other styles of art as well, or just that's really been your passion?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm into some other like mediums. Like I like to sew. I like to. I just recently got into ceramics, and there's a lot of different things in the arts that I would like to try. Like paint. I like to paint a little bit more. Maybe get a little bit more into animation and that sort of thing. But yeah, I've always been drawing. Has usually been like my path that I use to communicate with others and to express myself.
Do you prefer to stay within a monochrome palette rather than using a lot of color, or does it depend on the story that you're telling?
It's funny because I never really questioned my own decision to do that. I think maybe it just comes from having grown up reading a lot of manga and feeling like, well, manga is always in black and white, so that's what I'm going to do. It wasn't really like, oh, I think that this fits the story more. It was just kind of like, well, that's what I've seen, so I'm going to do that. But I actually really love working in color. It is a lot more work. So if I do any projects in color, like down the line, that'll be something that I have to figure out. But yeah, it was also a challenge, like to learn how to do things in black and white and to kind of like express different shades using just those two colors.
Do you work exclusively on that using that computer program, or do you start with pencil and paper?
So I have worked on paper and then scanned my pages into Photoshop and then kind of applied screen tones and stuff from there. I kind of started out that way, but once I got the job with They Called Us Enemy, I moved completely to digital so that I could have a kind of more streamlined process. And it definitely speeds things up a lot more and makes things a lot easier.
And I know that with children's picture books, usually the author has no say in who the illustrator is going to be. Is that often the same thing in the graphic novel world?
I don't know. I've never had the experience of like looking for an artist for my own project. I don't think that's the case though. I feel like it's more probably down to what kind of style they're looking for, who you know, and who's available, and who you want to work with, probably.
Did George have a lot of comments on your illustrations?
Um, I remember specifically that he, at the very beginning, he said that Henry wasn't chubby enough and that he wanted him to be more chubby. But in general, he was very, he gave very good feedback, very positive in general.
That's funny that he's so concerned about that.
Yeah, I don't know why it was so important to him that Henry was like quite chubby.
Wow. So the book is essentially from the viewpoint of a child, but you had to also convey, the truth of what was going on with the adults. Was that a difficult balance to keep?
I wouldn't say so much. I mean, I think that the script was written so like in such a way that made it kind of easy to go between the two. Like the mood of the script also kind of took that pattern. It wasn't so much. It wasn't very difficult to like change the mood in that sense, but I suppose a little bit. I tend to, my comfort zone is working sort of like lighthearted moments, so I had a little bit of a hard time moving into those more somber, serious areas, especially like the very like heavy political parts, where I had to draw a lot of politicians that I was very challenged by that. It's difficult to draw real people emoting when there's like one picture that you can work off of. So I definitely struggled with that.
Do you get the text already broken up into boxes and then you work from there?
Yeah, it's I think I showed a page from the script, but they'll show like each panel, like the page number, and then how many panels are on the page, and then within each panel is like the sort of setup, a little bit like a movie script, but broken into little panels, more or less. So it is actually like, I feel like maybe people give me too much credit sometimes for the book, but so much of it is definitely down to the writing, because all of the like blocking of the scene is done by the writers, and they did a really fantastic job.
So I'm sorry, I forget the two gentlemen's names. They actually took George's story and wrote out the text that appears in the graphic novel.
Yeah, it's Stephen Scott, who had worked with George previously on an Archie comics. I feel like I haven't read the comic myself, but I feel like George has a cameo as like a character who appears in someone else's dream or something. So he had worked with George before. He was a writer for Archie. And then Justin Eisinger, who works at IDW, had the idea together with him. So they reached out to him, and they used To the Stars, the memoir. They also did a lot of research on their own about like the surrounding circumstances politically at the time. So a lot of that was, I suppose, their own research, but they did take a lot of material from George's talks and from his book, and I think also from the documentary that's about George's life. There was a couple of scenes from there that I pulled.
I had seen his TED talk, and I could really hear his voice on some of the pages.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like he was narrating it out loud to me.
Mm-hmm.
So they did a great job of that.
Yeah.
Do you have any attraction toward the superhero genre?
I don't actually have that much experience with it, to be completely honest. I mean, I think the extent of my experience with superheroes is probably just like the movies. I don't know if that's sacrilege for me to say as a comic book artist, but that's been my experience. I grew up mostly reading manga.
Is it easier for women to break into the business in manga than it is in sort of the US comics where it does tend to be more about superheroes?
I can't say for sure because I haven't had that experience, but just based on the fact that manga is so kind of a part of everyday life in Japan, and that there's such a breadth of topics covered that there's kind of a niche for everything and everyone, that I would say probably so. I mean, you can have anything from like girls, like magical girl hero stuff, to like housewife cooking things, to like niche comics about being a young mother, to like literally any topic, like history in like Versailles, France. Like anything that you can think of, there's probably a manga that's been made out of it in Japan. So I would say just for that reason, probably, although I can't speak having not actually worked in Japan.
We have a question from a viewer. Said they love how your very clean lines carry so much emotion.
Thank
Can
you.
you tell us more about how you create your art using the computer?
Yes, I could maybe share my screen again if that's all right. Wait, let me open this.
Carrie's working on it.
Yeah, I'm also like taking a minute to. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the program that I use. It's called Clip Studio Paint, and this is the professional version called X. And I usually work from here. This I can open a page from my new. Wait, this is the wrong folder. My new book. Just like a random page. Um, okay, so here's one page from there. Can you see this? It's kind of like you can see there's like a lot of layers here that I use, and this this program is really nice for manipulating lines because you can actually go in and kind of manipulate it as if it were an object rather than just a line. So if you make a mistake, it's actually much easier to fix it in this way. You can sort of erase lines just like that, or you can also just erase like whole bits of the line like that. I don't know if this is really answering the question, but just is sort of like a idea of how to use this program a little bit. And I feel like I'm almost being like I talk as if I was sponsored by this program, but I'm not. I just really like it. But yeah, I mean, emotion, I feel like it's a balance between it's difficult to express emotion on a character that's really stylized. It's a hard balance to get like a likeness, but also a lot of emotion on a character, especially when it's based on a real person. So I definitely had a hard time doing that, but I'm glad that you enjoyed the way that I drew people's faces. Thank you so much to whoever that was.
Okay, we have another question. How do you feel about the current political climate with schools trying to ignore the past, and what can we do to help keep the past alive?
I mean, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily limited to this current political climate. I mean, I never learned about this history in school. I learned about it because I sought it out being Japanese American. I just like gravitated towards the Japanese section in the library, and that's how I found out about it. I mean, I don't have any personal like history with it, so I wouldn't have found out about it otherwise. I think the best answer is always just to read a lot and to ask, to be open to listening to people and to just do your best to not hold on to biases or narratives, regardless of even if they are held by people who you think probably know well, to always kind of have at least like a little drop of empathy and a drop of kind of, what's the word? Yeah, just kind of not thinking that you know best, I suppose, and always being willing to learn is, I think, the key. And to not centering yourself so much, but to be willing to take your own ego out of things and to listen to other people, I think is always a good way to live.
A lot of us who read this book were pretty disheartened that, California in the past seemed to be the leader of a lot of the anti-Japanese American sentiment, and that it's all happening again here now. So we felt that this was a pretty timely choice to get this book out into the community. And we were really glad that we could. We have another question for you from Jean. What you do seems like magic, and it is fascinating. Would you show us how you start a drawing on a blank page?
Oh, sure. I'll share again if that's okay, Carrie. I'll close this out. Let me see. How did I do this? I had like done this it's been a long time, so I don't remember what I'm doing. I had a template here, but I don't know where oh, there it is. Okay. So this is not really, so when it's for a comic, I would generally start like with, I suppose, like sort of a sketch, like detailing, okay, how many panels are there going to be? Where is everybody going to be? Like, what I should do is set up also like perspective lines so that everybody's like actually on the same plane, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I kind of forget to do that. And try to keep it like kind of interesting. Generally, you're going to want to keep like, I don't know if this is so much a comic or a rule of comics, but it's a rule in film, and I tend to just apply it to comics just to keep readability. But like, if somebody's standing on the left and they're speaking first, you're generally going to want to keep them on the left so that the reader doesn't get confused. So like, if you're showing the same character like later, you can move them around or like have them be shown like from the back of their head instead. But generally, I would keep them on the left so that the reader doesn't get confused. And then you do this, come here to this handy dandy thing where you create the frames and then cut them. And then I would usually like, actually, before doing that, I would cut the opacity down so that you can still see through it, and then cut it. And then from there you can go in here, go into that layer, start kind of detailing out how exactly you want that person to be drawn, kind of more detailed. And then the cool thing about this is that about keeping things in sort of a little box, is that you can then manipulate the gradient, like the tones, and it will only stay inside this little square, and then you can kind of play with it and cut them out. It's sort of like, yeah, like playing with a cut and paste kind of thing. It's like nice to be able to, it's very easy to use. So that's generally how I would approach a page. Although I generally don't like finish an entire page. I would do like the whole chapter, actually the whole book in sketches, and then move on after getting approval from my editor, from whatever team I'm working with, and then move on to like the inks, which is this more rough, or not rough, but more tight sort of drawing. And then after those are approved, then I would add those dots and lines and that sort of thing, or color if it was going to be in color. So that's generally how I would work. Sorry that the drawing's kind of sketchy, but anyway, that's generally
That's amazing how quickly you created two people there. That's remarkable.
Thank you.
Wow. I could never do that in a million hours. Who are some of your artistic influences?
I always reference back to Hayao Miyazaki is my favorite. All of his movies, I've just really, not even just the art style, but I think the things that he pays attention to, I really appreciate. The sort of attention to detail that he puts in, even things down to like the way that children tend to move, people's little gestures and mannerisms, the attention to detail in nature, and the sort of like ambiguousness that he puts into his characters of no one is ever really truly evil. There's just a lot of different agendas that are, I feel, reflect life in a way that is a way that I would like to live. As far as comics go, I really love Chika Umino, who wrote the comic Honey and Clover, and what is the English title? I think it's called March Comes in Like a Lion. And she's a manga author who writes sort of philosophical, I guess the genre would be like young adult, kind of romantic comedy-ish. But I really like her style, and I like the things that she talks about as well. As far as like purely visual, I really like this artist called Aki Irie. She is the author of a comic called Ran and the Grey World. And yeah, she's one of my favorites. Just from a solely visual standpoint, she has really gorgeous ink work.
Great, thank you. Do you have any schooling in illustration?
Barely. I I went to a college called Columbus College of Art and Design, which is the local art school in Columbus, for one semester. And I realized that I was trying really hard to just make things that I thought people would think were cool. And it kind of stifled my creativity. I felt also a little bit like I was paying a lot of money to learn things that I already knew. So I dropped out pretty quickly. I thought it would be better to save my money. I mean, I didn't get a job for a long time. I was a waitress for, I think, about 5 years after that. But yeah, I got to work on what I wanted to work on while saving money and just kind of figuring out what it was that I wanted to do. So I don't regret it. I don't have any debt, so.
Dean also asked how you learned to use the computer to create.
I've been using drawing digitally since I think maybe I was like 13 years old, and I got one of those little Graphire tablets from Wacom. I don't think I even had Photoshop back then, but I might have been using like Microsoft Paint or something. I don't know. I might have gotten a copy of like a cheap version of Photoshop, and then I mean, to be honest, I probably pirated it just to.
We won't tell.
Yeah, don't tell anyone. But I think I didn't even know how to really work it for a long time. I would just like look up artists on. There was these boards called oikaki boards. It was like a kind of like community forums where people would draw on like a in browser little like low resolution. Um, what would that be called? Like a little canvas, and then you could share your drawings with other people and get feedback and that sort of thing. So I kind of came up on those. I was on DeviantArt for a long time, which was like a really big influence for me, that whole community of digital artists. And yeah, I'm mostly just self-taught, I suppose, and self-taught and taught by, I guess, the example of my family and that online community. I suppose there were a lot of like really nice people on there when I was just like a little 14-year-old who were really nice and kind of influenced me and guided me, and yeah, were really great people. So
That's nice. It sounds like a very sharing community.
yeah, it was nice. I kind of miss that. I don't know what happened to all those communities.
Can you tell us what you're working on now?
Yes, I am working on Himawari House, which I shared a little bit in my presentation, and that drawing that I shared earlier was from that book. It's coming out, I think, October 19th from Macmillan First House. And yeah, I described it a little bit earlier, but it is about three girls. One of them is from the United States, or she was born in Japan and is coming back to Japan after living in the United States for a long time to sort of reconnect with her mother's language and with her heritage, and sort of the shock and reverse culture shock that she feels on realizing that the country that she thought was her home now sort of rejects her and doesn't recognize her as one of their own, and sort of the alienation that you feel upon not having perfect fluency in your mother tongue, or feeling like you can't express yourself the way that you want to. There's also a bit about kind of being a fish out of water in general and learning how to make a family out of friends and that sort of thing. It's kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of just like early 20s kind of stuff with a lot of cultural and language mixes thrown in there. So yeah, I had a lot of fun writing it, so I hope that people enjoy reading it.
Have you ever thought about writing for children? Graphic novels for children are super popular now.
Yeah, I think so. I think I would like to. I've never really gotten into it so much, but I think that I would really enjoy trying something like that in the future. So I hope that the opportunity comes up.
Yeah, I would imagine the children's publishers are looking for anything with quality, which obviously your work would be. So,
Thank you. That's very sweet.
um, so I've run out of questions. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about your work, or?
Not really.
Okay. Well, we all really enjoyed They Called Us Enemy, and the level of detail in the drawings was very obvious that you had done a great deal of research to get the historical accuracy in there in a very detailed way, and to tell George's story in a loving but truthful way, even though what he was going through was terrible, even if he didn't actually realize it himself, but you could feel such sympathy for his father. And at this time in particular, I think it's a very important book, and I hope that everyone is sharing this book with everyone else, because it's the right time to be reading this book, I believe. So thank you for your work on it, and we'll look forward to Himawari House for sure. And thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And if you're ever in Central California, come and see us in Goleta, Buellton, and Solvang.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel really privileged, of course, first to have worked on this book and to have the opportunity to share George's story with more people. And of course, also, as the whole team, we've been so blessed by how much librarians in particular have championed this story. And I know that George and Justin and Stephen have also feel the same way that that librarians are like superheroes, really just yeah, I mean, I honestly feel that way. You really are spreading knowledge and spreading education, and that those are the tools that are going to bring us into the future. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you to everybody who showed up today, for engaging in your community and for giving attention to stories like this, and for not allowing George's story to be forgotten, or the story of George's father and his family and so many others who had to go through this terrible time in history. So thank you so much to everybody for showing up today.
Great. Thank you, Harmony. And everybody, remember that we do have more programs coming up on this topic uh, through June, I believe. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and signing out from Goleta Valley Library.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Harmony.